Down where for cleansing from sin I cried. There to my heart was the blood applied. Glory to his name, singing glory to his name, precious name. Glory to his name, precious name. There to my heart was the blood applied. Glory to his name. I am so wondrously saved from sin. Jesus so sweetly abides within, there at the cross where he took me in. Glory to him. Everybody, glory to his name, precious name. Glory to his name, precious name. On there to my heart was the blood applied. Glory to his name. Let us pray. God our Father, we thank you for the opportunities afforded us by your grace and mercy. This opportunity, unique as it is, to come together, joined by persons online, to hear God information, be inspired on creating generational wealth, building wealth. And we want to thank you, God, for persons who have joined us week after week after week to hear more of the truths, gaining the knowledge, because your word declares that we are destroyed because of a lack of knowledge. And we have seen so many instances of our frustrations and aggravations because we have not known. We thank you for our presenters who would want to bring us into the know. Bless Senator Tamika Isaac Divine as she presents today. Let your spirit lead to the end that your will is done in Jesus' name. Amen and thank God. We say good evening and we welcome those persons who have joined us online. Just in case you're wondering why I sing glory to his name all the time, well, first of all, it is about his name. But secondly, that's probably the only song I can kind of sort of sing and carry half enough tune, y'all help me out. In fact, when you've sung a song probably over 2,000 times, you just go with it and y'all help me to go. You remember that time, y'all, I don't know if it happened here at 11 o'clock, but I was singing it at 12 o'clock, 6:30. I was singing it at 12 noon, and then I told Pastor Jackson, come on, take it over. And he went, you remember that? He went to somewhere else with the same song, but the word, it wasn't, he wasn't where I was with it. Huh? He had them somewhere else. I just get by myself because I just love the song, and I do know that whatever we do is always for his glory. And that's so very important to me. If I learn another song, I'll try it, but stay with me on glory to his name. We will not have Bible study next Wednesday. That's the day before Thanksgiving. However, on the following Wednesday, my son-in-law, Roderick Shiver, will talk about tax planning. Tax planning. If you know someone with a business, they would want to hear what he has to say. He said to me, unfortunately, one of the reasons many black businesses do not survive is because they don't understand the tax part of it, the taxes that are involved in it. They don't even take out taxes like they should take out taxes on the employees, etc. And eventually it catches up with them. And so we look forward to that. If you're blessed in any way and have something to leave for evangelism ministry, we would that you do so. Our presenter today, Senator Tamika Isaac Divine, has played a major part in shaping the future of my sister, 88 years old, who's at Laurel Crest, and her two grandchildren, Cheyenne and Devin, who live in Atlanta, Georgia. Were it not for her, I mean, I don't know how we could have done it. And the sad part about it is this. We didn't know anything about this. We didn't know anything about it. Lack of knowledge, and we were struggling. We didn't know what we were going to do. We didn't know what we were going to do. And then, of course, after she received dementia, had not we put everything in place, we would have been in really bad shape. You have no idea the shape we would have been in had not she kind of put some things in place for us. You need to hear what she has to say. Let's welcome Senator Tamika Isaac Devine.
Good evening, Brooklyn, and good evening, Brooklyn Beyond. It is indeed an honor and privilege to be here in my professional capacity to bring you some information as part of this series of building generational wealth. I thank Pastor Jackson and Deacon Williams for the vision of just doing this, because what I see so much as a real estate and probate attorney is people who don't have things in place, and then what I'm trying to help them navigate either a legal challenge or the court system, things are so much worse than it could have been had they planned. And so I'm so grateful to be able to be here and be part of this. And there's so many things that I'm going to talk to you about that will tie into things that you heard in some previous sections, and then some things that you'll probably hear in some future sessions, like with Roderick and tax planning. But I'm going to talk to you about generational wealth, building generational wealth through the proper estate planning. Proper estate planning is so important because we, particularly in our community, don't always plan for our assets. A lot of us think that we don't have an estate. People think an estate is a whole lot of money, a whole lot of assets, and I have people all the time say, well, I don't have a will, I don't have a trust because I don't have anything. And we all have something. So I'm going to start first by talking about, like, what is an estate? Because people are unsure and unclear. Your estate is anything that is an asset that you have. It could be your house, your retirement accounts, your bank accounts, your insurance policies, any jewelry or fine china, even your social media is part of your estate. Us as attorneys, we're learning the digital divide and how when someone passes away, who has access to get into their Facebook account and other things online. And so that is also part of your estate. And so that is what an estate is. And so if you have something, if you have one or more of these things, then you have an estate. It may not be worth what you want it to be, but it is definitely worth something that you need to plan for and protect. Because if you don't do things on the front end, it's going to get handled regardless. And if it's handled the way you don't want it, it can take away from whatever wealth you have built. We are here to build wealth and, of course, to leave an inheritance for our children and our children's children. And that inheritance could be the house that we, paid for 20, 30 years. And now, if we don't properly plan, that house could go to somebody we don't want it to, or it could go to somebody who doesn't know how to take care of it. It could be taken for taxes and all kinds of things. So we want to make sure that we're planning appropriately. So, Minister Bracey, next slide. Yeah. So what is an estate plan? So let me just go into what is an estate plan. Estate plan is a plan that consists of written documents that will outline your end-of-life wishes, your things that once you pass away, how you want your assets distributed upon your death. A plan is not just a will or a trust. The estate plan is a whole plan on how things need to happen. And the estate plan is individual to you. That's why attorneys do a plan with every person, because we need to plan for things how you want things to happen. And you've heard people say the saying, if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. If you do not have a plan for your assets, then the plan that goes into what happens to them most likely will be against what you want and could cost the loss of some of your assets that you've worked really hard for. So next slide. So let's start a little bit. Mr. Bracey, next slide, please. So before, first of all, I want to talk about beforehand, by documenting your wishes, this is the certain things you can do. You can control, first and foremost, who receives your assets after your passing. You know, who's going to get what you have and you've worked really hard for? You can ensure that your family is provided for financially. You can specify guardianship for your children if you have minor children or pets. You can specify personal medical treatment preferences. We do that through the living will, what you want end of life. Do you want life support or not? Do you want to donate your organs or not? All that's part of your plan. You can give thoughtful instructions in your absence. So, you know, what happens when I'm not here? How do I want things distributed? How do I want my money to be distributed? Who do I want to get things? Who do I want to be cared for? Whether they get it or not, how can I take care of those things? You want to spare your family confusion, cost, and time by allocating your assets. And I have to tell you, some of the biggest things is family confusion because things weren't properly put into place. And I'll have to say this, and I say this respectfully, I have so many folks who they feel like if they don't talk about it, if they don't plan for it, it's not going to happen. Well, as Pastor Jackson always says, that the certain things that are going to happen is death and taxes. We know that we're all going to pass. We don't know when that day is going to be. But when that day happens, if we have not properly planned, a lot of confusion happens. And early in my legal practice, I did family court, and because of my political schedule, I couldn't do family court, so I got into real estate and probate, and it was so funny. People were like, oh, I'm sure you're happy you got out of family court, and I thought so at first until I started dealing with people after someone has passed. And I'm going to tell you, family confusion, you have mama pass away, and children, even if they were really close, it just goes awry. So we want to keep down that confusion. You want to lessen your estate taxes and legal fees, and I'll talk a little bit about that. Streamline how your assets pass to beneficiaries, and that is some certain things we can do to avoid it going through the probate process, but it's still a plan on who gets your things. You can choose who's going to administer your estate, and that's really important. We'll talk a lot about that. And then you can reduce the stress of funeral planning. I'll tell you that as well. I mean, if you haven't planned for what's going to happen, like as far as your funeral, some of the biggest arguments happen those couple days after mama or daddy has gone to her glory, and, you know, I want mama to wear the purple dress, and I want this. I want her buried with this. I literally had a family that had to exhume a body because mom was buried with something that one of the children did not want her buried with. And it was at a cost and expense that really could have been avoided. So these are some things that you can document ahead of time. Next slide, please. So I want to start off first as an attorney. Once you say, okay, I am going to start my estate plan, I need to call an attorney to help me sit down and figure out my plan. Before you call me, before we sit down, in order for me to give you the proper solutions on what you want done and what documents we need, how we need to do it, there are certain things that I need to know. So it's really important that you have some things and you make some decisions and you know some things before you come and sit down with an attorney. So I want you to ask yourself a couple things. Number one, do you own interest in any real estate? Do you own your home? Do you have heirs property? Do you have timeshares? And this is so important, and I said this earlier at 12. If you own your home, if you bought a house and you own a home, you do own your house. I talk to people all the time, and I say, well, do you own your home? They're like, no, the bank owns it because I have a mortgage. No, the bank doesn't own it. The bank has a mortgage. You own your home, and you have a deed that says you own your home. So I want you to ask yourself, do you have an interest in property? And then we're going to ask how is that titled? And I'll talk about the titling a little bit, but it's important that you look at your deed to see how your deed is titled. So I gave the 12 o'clock, and I'm going to give you guys that homework, that if you own your home, I want you to pull your deed and see how it's titled when you leave here this evening. Also, do you own your vehicle? Do you own a boat? Do you own a mobile home? Same thing, and I need to know if you own that, even if you're paying on it. And that's a little bit different, because if you're still paying on your car, you don't have a car title yet. But if you do have your car title, how is it titled? And we need to know how it's titled, because there's a difference on how your vehicle is titled, whether or not it's going to go through probate or not. Do you have insurance policies or retirement investment accounts? And if so, do you have a beneficiary listed, and do you have a backup beneficiary? There are so many times that people will have a insurance policy. You got your job 30 years ago when the job said, okay, here's your insurance. Who do you want to be your beneficiary? You list someone as your beneficiary. You work on that job, and things have changed. Life has happened. As people say, life be lifing, and you don't think about that insurance policy again, and then something happens to you, and then someone goes and gets that insurance policy, and they realize your beneficiary is your mom who passed away 10 years ago. And you didn't have a backup beneficiary. And so then that insurance proceeds goes into your estate, which again increases the value of your estate and has to go through probate. So we want to make sure that you know if you have insurance policies, you have a beneficiary listed and you have a backup beneficiary. Next slide, please. Some other information. This started a lot of conversation earlier today, so I'm going to try and be succinct and answer questions that you have. But some information that you want to have before you sit down with me as well. Again, you want to make sure you ask yourself about the real estate, the vehicles, and your insurance policy. You also want the name, addresses, and phone numbers of your heirs. And when I say your heirs, that's your spouse, that is your natural and or adopted children, and your grandchildren. Make sure that you know who those people are. You have contact information for them, because whoever's going to administer your estate is going to need that information. This is really, really important. Make sure that you tell your lawyer about all of your children, even ones that you may not have a relationship with. Even children that you may have had years ago out of wedlock, you haven't been in that child's life, that is still your child, which means they still can inherit from you. And if you don't include them in your estate plan, they can make a claim on your estate. The state of South Carolina has a claim called the omitted child claim. And a child can make a claim against your estate if they are legally your child. I have one, actually, Deacon Williams, after I left here today, I went back to my office, and I was looking at, I mentioned earlier today, I've got one where we had to have a DNA test. It was inconclusive, so now there's got to be another DNA test. That's like $3,000. Well, the lady decided she didn't want to go through all that. She doesn't want to pay $3,000 for the more conclusive DNA test. And so I told the court that. When I got back to my office today, the court said she doesn't have a choice, and we'll send we're going to send the deputies to go get her and take her to do the test if she doesn't want to. So the courts don't play, because the law is very specific at who has a right to inherit from you. And so if that is a child that you haven't had a relationship with, and that's, that happens a lot in our community. If that's a child, if you know of that child, you need to make sure your lawyer knows about that child, because we need to make sure that we have your plan tight, so that, that could be a child that you don't have a relationship with. It could be a child that, you basically has been disrespectful to you, has never wanted that relationship with you, and you work really hard and you say, well, I don't want them to have my stuff. If you don't want them to get what you have, then we're going to need to make sure that you plan for that. So those are really, really important things. This other one is, and you also want to know whether or not your heirs have any debts, credit issues, and children out of wedlock. And this caused a lot of conversation earlier today. People want to know, well, what if we don't know? If you don't know, you don't know. But if you know it, you need to tell the attorney, because those are things that we need to plan for, because I need to make sure I'm giving you the right information. And what I mean by this, and I gave the scenario earlier today, I have an estate. Mom did not have a will. So all three of her children equally inherited her house. They got a third, a third, a third. Well, brother has a $63,000 child support bill, and it's a debt. And when you own real estate in the state of South Carolina, that real estate can attach to your property. It can be a lien on your property. And so sisters are like, well, that's his bill, not ours. Well, yeah, but now because mama didn't have a will and all three of y'all own this house together, then that $63,000 is affecting your asset as well, because that $63,000 that he owns now is attached to that property, because he's a co-owner of that property for you. Had mama had a will, had I known about it, had we done her plan, we could have made sure that he never inherited that real estate. And so that $63,000 debt would still only be on him, and it wouldn't be encumbering that house. So those are things that you need to know, which means you have to have some conversations with your family. As you're doing your plan, you need to know, and some of us, we know our kids who might not have great credit issues. We know who might have some issues. Those are things that you need to know about. And so we can properly plan to make sure that your assets that you've worked really hard for, that you're building, you're trying to build generational wealth and make sure you have something passed down to your children, that once it passes to your children, they don't have other issues that, that can take that house away or take that money away or get encumbered because of because you didn't plan property. So those are some things that we definitely need to know. One thing that came up earlier, a question I want to say, when I talk about the heirs and the children, I cannot say enough that when you're planning, part of the plan you may do, and it's not necessarily a thing you'll do with me as an attorney, but as you're planning for your funeral or other things, or when you're planning mama's funeral or somebody that you're working with, do not list in obituary children that are not your children, okay? We have a big issue in our community. You know, she was like a daughter. So you think you're making everybody feel good by saying, and she had 3 daughters, this person, this person, this person. She really only had 2. She helped raise the niece like a daughter, but she never adopted them. Once you list that, the probate court sees that obituary, and they see that you've listed this person as a child. And then now we have to then prove that that person is not a child. And that's more hoops to jump through. So you can put like a daughter, you can say a special friend, all that stuff, but do not list people as an heir that is not an heir, because that can cause complications during the probate process. Okay, next slide, please. So I'm gonna jump through a lot of these because I want to spend more time on the last 2, and I ran out of time earlier, so I want to make sure that we get in everything. But I want to make sure you have the right documents. As part of estate planning, like I said, there are certain things that I'm going to do with you, or your attorney's going to do with you. There's certain things that your financial planner may do with you. There's certain things that you may do on your own, but all of that is part of your estate plan. And what I do as an estate planner, some of these things might be legal documents that you're doing that will say who you want to get things upon your passing, but there are certain things we can put into place now that still dictate who would get things upon your passing, and it doesn't have to go through probate court. But the first is the last will and testament, and I'm not going to talk too much about it because I know Attorney Starks talked about that a couple weeks ago, but I will hit on some high things. But you want to make sure you have a last will and testament. You want to make sure you have a durable power of attorney. That is to handle your business affairs if you become incapacitated or can't handle your things. So if you have a power of attorney and then 5 years from now you start getting dementia and you can't handle your business affairs, if you don't have this in place, then the attorney's going to have to help you go through probate court and get a guardianship and conservatorship in place, which could cost thousands upon thousands of dollars, whereas your power of attorney is only going to cost you a couple hundred. So you want to have a power of attorney, and it's durable because it goes past your incapacity. So if you do it now, it has to be recorded, but it doesn't have to be recorded until later if you don't want it to, but it can be recorded now. And then once if you get older, you get dementia, you're in a car accident and you're in a coma, and you can't handle things, that durable power of attorney will allow somebody to handle things for you. Your healthcare power of attorney and living will in South Carolina, that is actually one document. There's 2 separate things, but it's all comprised of one document. The healthcare power of attorney is the person who's going to make decisions, can talk to the doctor, can get your medical records, can do all that stuff. So that's the healthcare power of attorney. And then the living will part of it is 3 specific things that the doctors don't want to know: whether or not you want to be an organ donor, whether or not you want life support, and whether or not you want to be tube fed. So all of those things are part of that healthcare power of attorney. It is so important that you appoint somebody that you trust and will carry out your wishes. And then deeds. Deeds are, and I'll talk about them more in depth, but deeds is the title to your house. And so, like I mentioned, we'll talk about title issues. There are certain things that you can do with a deed that may avoid your house or your real estate from going through probate, or at least dictates who can get it upon your passing. And then a trust is a legal document. It's a legal entity. It's actually setting up a legal entity where you put your assets for the benefit of someone else. So a trust, a lot of times people think, oh, I've got to have a ton of things to have a trust. You don't have to have a ton of things to have a trust. There are certain reasons you may want to have a trust, and we'll talk about the benefits and the pros and cons of having a trust, but that is also part of it. As part of your estate plan, you may not have all of these documents. You may have, just a couple, but these are all things that you want to consider because as you're thinking about what is designed for you, what you want to happen before you pass, what do you want to happen once you pass. The other thing I will say about the powers of attorney that some people forget or don't realize, a power of attorney is for when you are living. So if someone has power of attorney over mama and mama passes away, when mama passes away, the second mama passes away, that power of attorney is no longer valid. If you still do do her affairs after she passes away under your power of attorney, you are violating the law, okay? The power of attorney is only for living. In your will or through your trust, whoever you designate at that point can handle things upon your passing. And that's what we call a personal representative in this state, and I'll talk to that about in a second. Okay, Minister Bracy, next slide. So just quickly, because I know, again, Attorney Starks talked a lot about wills a couple weeks ago, but for those of you who weren't here or may not remember, I just want to point out a couple things. So a will must be in writing. In South Carolina, it must be in writing. So I have people always say, well, what about a video will? I saw, this person had a video will. You can have a video will if you want to, but that is not a legal will in South Carolina. So you still have to have it written, okay? And there are certain requirements that your will has to do. It has to clearly state your desires to transfer your property. It must name the personal representative. And it's a good idea, if I'm doing it, I'm going to push you to do a successor personal representative as well. But you need to have at least name your personal representative. Again, other states call them an executor, but in our state it's called a personal representative. And then you want to make sure you give your personal representative certain authority, including selling your property. The state statute does not allow a personal representative to sell property unless they get permission from a court. And so if your will gives them that permission, they don't have to get permission from the court, which a lot of times is really good because, especially if you pass away, you still have a house and you have a mortgage on the house, but all your children have their own houses and they have mortgages and they can't pay their mortgage and mama's mortgage too. And then you might want to have the personal representative have the ability to sell that property and so that you can get rid of that mortgage. If you don't have that in there, they have to ask for permission from the court, and that takes months upon months upon months. And some people don't think that a mortgage company can foreclose on a piece of property that's in probate. That is not true. They can foreclose on a property that is in probate. And if children are like, well, I can't afford to pay mama's mortgage, there wasn't enough insurance money to pay it, and they don't pay that mortgage, then again, your building generational wealth has just gone out the window because you haven't provided for making sure that that mortgage gets taken care of, and that house that you've had for the last 15 years and paying mortgage and might have $100,000 worth of equity may be lost because nobody could pay the mortgage or could handle things. The will also needs to be signed by you, and it needs to be witnessed by two people who are not beneficiaries of the will, or spouses of beneficiaries of the will, or parents of beneficiaries of the will. We call them, they're not interested parties. That is so, so important. So I get the question all the time, and y'all might have this question, well, Tamika, do I really have to come to a lawyer to get a will? Can't I just go to LegalZoom or do whatever, download a document online? Yeah, you can. I don't recommend it because I see so many people that they're like, oh, okay, yeah, I got a will. I downloaded this document. I did it, and something is wrong. They don't name a personal representative, so you still got to go through extra hoops in the court to get a personal representative. The witness is the spouse of one of the people who is taking under the will, which invalidates the will. It's not signed correctly. So there's all kinds of things I've seen in probate court that's happened. So if you had, somebody asked me earlier, they said, well, I have a will, but yes, it's something I did on my own. Can you review it for me? At minimum, get an attorney to look at it and make sure it meets all the legal requirements. Because when you're not here and that will's not valid, then guess what? It's like you would have saved so much time and effort and money and heartache on your family if you would have just had somebody check it. But it is always good to have somebody look at the will. The other things I want to say, I think, is next slide. Okay, a couple things I want to say about the will before I move on to other things. Don't leave nominal bequests, and I see it all the time. If you do not want to leave something to somebody, we will take care of that. Don't leave somebody $1. that just hurt. I mean, that causes a lot more frustration than it needs to be. The question came up earlier, like, well, what if you do want to leave your children out? We prepare for that in the will. We talk about who your family is and why you're not leaving something. I had a lady who her daughter had a lot of debt, and she didn't want that debt to be, attached to the property. I talked about the child support issue. There's lots of reasons you may not want the child to get anything. We will say that in a nice way in the will, but leaving somebody $1 just because you feel like, oh, I have to leave them something. You don't have to leave them something. You just have to make sure that it's clear that that was indeed your wishes. But the other thing is make sure that you are not leaving assets to minors. If someone is under the age of 18 in the state of South Carolina, if they inherit anything that is worth over $10,000, you have to set up a conservatorship with the probate court. And that means that is a restricted account that the court has to monitor until they reach the age of majority. So if you have an insurance policy, and I mentioned before, you have an insurance policy and your beneficiary is your daughter. Your daughter predeceases you and she has minor children. And then you pass away, and her estate says, okay, these are your next of kin, these are your grandchildren, and those grandchildren both get $12,000 apiece. Guess what? Somebody's going to have to spend probably $3,000 to $5,000 setting up a conservatorship, and then that money is restricted until they're the age of 18. So we can handle making sure your grandchildren get what you want through a trust or through other things, and that's why it's important to plan. You need to think about all these contingencies, but if you don't think about that and you let your children inherit, I cannot tell y'all how so many people, these are people who did not have wills, but I can't tell you how many people who have passed away, older or younger parents and minors have inherited a part of a house. Well, guess what? Mom and dad passes away. Mom is living, house wasn't right for survivorship. He didn't have a will, and two children are on that house. Mom can't refinance that house to get a better interest rate without court approval. She can't sell that house without court of approval. And minors are not paying the mortgage. Mom's paying the mortgage, but she can't do anything. So again, that's all part of this plan. The other things I want to say about the will before I go on is the personal representative. A personal representative, again, is like the executor. You want to make sure that you have somebody that you trust, someone that you know can handle things. So if you've got somebody who they can't handle their own bank account, you don't want to put them over your estate, because they are going to be responsible for the court, making accountings to the court, doing some things. And I'll tell you, our Richland County probate judge, she is no joke. I've seen her put personal representatives in jail because they have not handled things correctly. And so if they don't, again, this might be your child, and I have so many people say, I just believe that it should be my oldest son. There's nothing that says your oldest son. I understand you believe that, but your baby boy can't pay his own bills. He's not going to pay your bills when you're not here, and you don't want that stuff to go into foreclosure or something else. So you want to make sure you have a personal representative that can handle things. I also get a question does the personal representative have to be somebody who inherits from the will? It doesn't have to be. I mean, I've had people name personal representative their business advisor, their cousin who is a CPA. It doesn't have to be somebody who's inheriting. It just has to be somebody that you know is going to be able to keep things and get things to the court and handle things that you want them to. All right.
One question, Tamika.
Yes, sir.
In the last slide, you talked about a legal will written down, signed by you, 2 witnesses. If somebody is doing a last-minute will or loading down a will, now, it's not legal until they get it notarized. Do they then have to get it notarized with the
good question.
With the witnesses and you seeing, the notary had to see you all signing it, right?
It's a good question. So I do notarize my wills, but if you saw the legal requirement, South Carolina actually doesn't require that a will be notarized. It just has to have 2 witnesses. So it doesn't have to be notarized. It just has to have 2 witnesses. Like in my law firm, it has 2 witnesses. It'll be me, and I'll notarize it as well as a notary, just that extra step because I am a notary. But if it just has two witnesses, it's still legal. But those two witnesses have to see the testator sign the will. And that's a big thing. So, and those two witnesses can't be an interested party. So if dad is in the hospital, you know, they've already called hospice, you don't think he's going to make it, and he doesn't have a will, and you're all like, oh, I need to quickly go. I'm going to go and download this document and get him to sign it in the hospital. You can do that, but if it needs to make sure it's done. So I've had people call me. I've gone to hospitals before and done a will with somebody who is on their deathbed just to make sure it's done correctly. But yeah, it is not valid unless it's signed by those two people, and those two people have to see the person do the signature. And I'll tell you that the biggest thing, and in the last 2 years, I've had so many will contests. I've got one that we ended up losing it because dad was home, he was on hospice. Daughter quickly calls a friend who's a notary. They download some document, leaves everything to her, leaves out her siblings, and dad signed it. And the witness and notaries were there, and we actually had to go. The siblings challenged it. We went to court, and then it came out through there that the notary actually did not see him sign it, and then the other witness who saw him sign it said he was in and out of sleep, and so he lacked capacity. And so the judge threw that will out. So, yeah, so the will would be valid upon the witness signatures, but you got to think about what if this gets challenged? If this will gets challenged, making sure that you don't have anybody that can challenge something because a witness wasn't correct, a witness didn't see him sign it, etc. Next slide, Minister Bracy. The other things, I want to make sure that you update, other things to remember. Make sure that you update your will after life-changing events. After you get married, after the birth of a child, the adoption of a child, death of a child, a divorce or separation. I will tell you, I've had several instances where someone has had an old will and they've never updated it, and there's new children, and those children can file an omitted child claim. They got married, that spouse can file an omitted spouse claim. They also, or they got divorced and they didn't change their will. And guess what? There's a new wife, and new wife is mad because old wife is listed in the will, and he never updated his will. And I have that all the time with insurance policies. I see it all the time with insurance policies because people forget about that insurance policy, and they don't change the beneficiary from ex-wife. And ex-wife gets that money and has her good old time, and new wife is stuck with the bills and doesn't have anything. So you want to make sure all of these documents, I said this is for your will, but all of your essential documents, just review them periodically, but definitely under major life-changing things. You also need to make sure that you have your original will, and it needs to be in a safe place, because the original will is what has to go to probate court. If you don't have your original will, a copy can be probated if all interested parties agree. If you have a child that you left out of that will, and there's only a copy, and that child's like, I'm not agreeing to that, because if I don't agree to that, I get an interest in stuff, so I don't want that. You need to make sure you have it. The last thing I'll say about wills before I move on real quickly is making sure that with your will, I lost my train of thought what I was going to say on that. The other thing I was going to say with a will, making sure that when you are doing your will, that you let people know where that will is, but that you also recognize that will is what has to go to probate court, but it's not until after you pass. People think that that the attorney keeps the original, or that the will goes down to the courthouse and gets recorded when you do it. A will can be changed anytime. So we don't record them, because how do you know if you change it after you get married, after you have whatever, and you got 5 wills on file, that's just confusing. So the wills don't get recorded, so they only go to the probate court upon your passing. So you need to make sure that the original is kept in a place and that people know where that original is. Okay. Any questions before we move on there?
So if you have property in multiple states, should you do a will? Or
Great question. Combined will. The will needs to be, the will can be in the state where you are, but it can name your property in other states. But again, that's part of a estate plan. We'll talk about deeds and stuff too, but that could be part of your estate plan. You want to make sure you mention them in your will, but we might do something else depending on where the estate is so that it doesn't have to go through probate. Because if you have to actually probate that property, if that property has to go through probate, you're not only doing a probate in South Carolina, but you're doing a probate, what we call ancillary estate, in all those states because that property has a transfer. So that's where trusts come into good play as an alternative, or the deeds, like making sure that you have a life estate deed or a right to survivorship deed so it doesn't have to go through probate. I know the other thing I was going to say about will, but let me get these two. Yes, ma'am.
I have a will already, but listening to what you're saying now, I know I need to change it because I definitely got to take one of people's off in order to get the other two to get some money. What happens to the first will? Anybody, would it come up again?
Good question. So you would destroy that first will. Once you get a new will in place, you destroy the first one. So you shred it so that no one can bring it back up. There was somebody over here? Yes,
I was once told that you should include numbers such as your insurance policies and on like that, like with your will, so that you, upon your passing, God forbid, people don't have to go looking for all of those documents. Is there an addendum or something like that in the will, or is that included with it?
Great question. So you wouldn't include your insurance policy in your will unless you want to direct certain things. Like I have people who will put, they have daughter as beneficiary, but they want to make sure that that money goes to pay off the mortgage so that the kids don't have the mortgage. So we'll put it in the will, because if it goes to, and I didn't say this earlier, so forgive me, when I talked about different things, well, we'll talk about it in probate assets. Insurance policies, insurance proceeds are not probate assets because they go to the beneficiary, and that's the beneficiary's money. The probate court doesn't oversee that or anything, so the beneficiary can do what they want with that money. But if you're leaving it to daughter, first of all, if you're leaving it to her, you should trust that she's going to do what you want to do. So you should tell her, I'm putting you beneficiary in my insurance policy, but this insurance policy is to pay this off. But you also would include that in your will. But other than that, to go to your real question, and I brought a sample, what I always suggest for people is, no, you don't put it in your will, but you put it with your stuff. So like when I do an estate plan for people, I give them a portfolio. Not everything in here is stuff that I have anything to do with. So like it has a place to put your will, a place to put your trust, your powers of attorney, but it also has a place to put your deeds. It has a place to put your bank statements. It has a place to put your funeral arrangements. It has a place to put your insurance policies. And so this is what I tell my clients. I said, put everything in here so that your personal representative is not looking around. They know where everything is. They know where who has your insurance and who the beneficiaries are. They know what banks you bank at and where your bank accounts are. This is something that will keep it all in the right place. So it's not actually attached to your will, but it is important to keep it with all those documents so that whoever your personal representative is who's handling your estate, they don't have to go searching for everything. I know the other thing I was going to say about wills is, and then I'm going to move on to some other things, keep us on time. Oh, yeah, did it again. We got 15 minutes, I'm going to hurry up. The reason I'm talking about the wills as part of the estate plan, it's not the only document. We're going to go over the others. But if you do not have a will, or you have not planned properly for other things, the state dictates who gets your stuff. And I stress to people all the time that people don't realize that if you pass without a will, it's called intestate. If you are married, your spouse gets half and your children get half. If you're not married, your children get everything. If you're not married and you don't have children, then your parents get stuff. I will tell you, remember I talked about those children out of wedlock and stuff? I've had so many people who have gotten so mad because mom has raised child, dad has never paid child support, he's never been that child's life, child's single, no kids, but they have a house and they have a car, and mom comes to me and I'm like, you know we have to include dad. And they're like, why you gotta include dad? He ain't never done anything, da, da, da. I'm sorry, that's the law. And not only is it the law that we have to include him, he gets half. So if you don't plan properly, like especially young people, so if you have children or grandchildren, you need to talk to them about estate planning. People think I'm young, nothing will ever happen to me. I've had 21-year-olds die in a car accident. I've had 40-year-olds have a heart attack. You know, we don't know when we are going to go. Once they buy their house, once they have their car, all that stuff, they need to be doing estate planning as well. Okay, I'm going to go through the rest of these real quick so I can spend some time on deeds and trust. So, Minister Bracy, next slide. Durable power of attorney, I talked about this. This is names a person to manage your assets if you become incapacitated. This must be recorded in the county that you live in. So I get some people who will do POAs. Again, they'll go online to get some POA, but then they never record it. And then they try and use it, and then they realize, Pastor Jackson actually told the 12 o'clock Bible study a story about his niece who had a power of attorney, and I mentioned to him, I said, well, is it recorded? And he found that it wasn't recorded, so it wasn't valid. And so this person was showing this power of attorney to people, and it wasn't valid. It can include healthcare directors. It does not have to be a family member. Again, I stress that. I have so many people like, I don't have anybody in my family that I trust that can handle my business affairs. It doesn't have to be a family member, but it needs to be somebody that you trust and can handle your business. Next slide. The healthcare power of attorney, and next slide, and the living will, I mentioned those before. This is a South Carolina approved form. So these are forms you can get online because it is the same, whether I draft it as an attorney or you get it online. If you go and it says South Carolina, it is the same document. So you can get this, but this will handle your healthcare decisions. But again, it must be witnessed, and this does have to be notarized. So the will doesn't have to be notarized. Your living will does have to be. Okay, next slide. Just every time you go to the doctor, make sure you're taking your healthcare power of attorney and living will, especially if you have children who may argue as to what needs to happen. The doctors will shut down and not talk to anybody. So you need to make sure that they have that. Next slide. Yes, ma'am.
How can you tell if the power of attorney, if you're a medical provider, how can you tell if the power of attorney is actually registered with the deed? With the register of deeds, if they show it to you?
So, well, if it's registered, it will have a registered deed sticker on it. It'll have a recording sticker, but that's the durable power of attorney. But for the medical providers, they're going to look for this healthcare power of attorney, and that's why the state went to an exact form, because doctors were like, well, I don't know what this is, because lawyers did them different ways. So the state of South Carolina, maybe about less than 10 years ago, did an actual form. So whether a lawyer drafts it for you or you get it online, and some people, you can go to legal services and they'll give you the form. It is the exact same form. That does not have to be recorded, but the medical providers will know if it's legit because it is the same form they see all the time, and they're going to look, is this initialed here? Is this signed? Is this notarized? Okay, so let's get to the fun part. So I talked about your homework, and I talked about part of the estate plan. So again, estate planning is wills are when you are no longer here. Powers of attorney people can handle things, but there's certain things that are still part of your estate plan. Probably the biggest asset most of us will ever have is our home. And that is something you want to make sure it gets taken care of. And there's so many times where I've seen that the home that mom and dad bought, sister bought, paid for all these years, and because it wasn't done correctly, then it went to somebody they didn't want it to or didn't get handled. So there are ways for your real estate not to have to go through probate court. And so you want to look at, I gave y'all the homework, go and pull your deed and see how it's titled. There are certain ways it's titled. It could either be titled tenants in common, joint tenants with right to survivorship, or it could be a life estate deed. These are ways that we kind of plan for. If it's tenants in common, it still may have to go through probate. But if you're trying to avoid probate and you own your house, then we want to look at, see how you hold it. So if you were husband and wife and you bought your house 20 years ago, look at it, because that house may be as tenants in common, which means if one of you passes away and then you don't have a will that says how it goes, then the law dictates who gets the other spouse's part of that. And like I said, half goes to spouse, half goes to children. I've seen minors inherit houses. I've seen the children that haven't been around and get the houses. And so we want to make sure that you have that right. So if you want it to automatically go to somebody, and it doesn't have to be your spouse, it could be joint tenants of right to survivorship with you and your child. You can have it like that, but that means it automatically passes to the other person upon your passing. The other one is a life estate deed. So say you are 80 years old and you get your home, you get the owner occupied rate and you get a homestead exemption. You don't want to add your child because you could lose your homestead because of that child is under 65, and so they don't qualify for that tax benefit. And so I'll get people say, oh, I want to add my child with right to survivorship, and I said, no, you don't want to do that. But what we can do, so it doesn't go through probate, you can keep your house as a life estate, and then the remainder interest will go to your child. And then upon your passing, all they have to do is file your death certificate with the Register of Deeds office, and then they get the house. So again, that's something we'll talk about, like what are your goals? Who do you want to get the house? Sometimes you want the house to be sold because you got 3 grown kids with their own houses. I mentioned with own mortgages. Somebody's not going to pay your mortgage. You might say, let me just sell the house and let the proceeds be split between all children. So those are all the things that we're going to talk about. But through your deed, you can do some things that keep it from going into probate. Minister Bracy, next slide. And then a trust. A trust is a legal entity that hold and manage your assets for the benefit of a beneficiary. And it requires 2 steps. You got to set up a trust. So once you set it up, and then you have to fund the trust. You have to put things into a trust. I get lots of folks say, well, I don't have enough assets for a trust. You may or may not. Let's talk about it. Some reasons that people will do a trust, we'll go through. Minister Bracy, let's go to the next slide. The pros and cons of a trust. Part of the benefits of it avoids probate. If you put things in a trust, again, you have to set up the trust, but then you have to fund the trust. So once you set up the trust, you're going to put your house in the trust now. So the house doesn't ever have to go through probate. If you put, life insurance policies or any other things, nothing goes through probate that if it's in the trust. So it does avoid probate. It's privacy. Probate court is public record. So some people don't like that. They don't like that somebody can go down to the probate court and see how much money they had, what their value of their estate is, who they left things to, what their will said, and all that's public information. So if you want to avoid probate court, a trust might be something you want to consider. You can control the distribution. So if you decide that you don't want to leave anything to your kids, but you want to make sure your grandkids are taken care of. You can make sure, but you don't want your grandkids to get the money, again, under 18. You don't want them to get it while they're minors, or you might not want them to get it at 23. Or you might not want them to get it if they don't go to college, or whatever you want to put on it. Those things, we can do that in a trust. You can't typically do that through a will and through probate court. Once you pass and your will says whatever and those distributions are made, those distributions are made. But if you do it in a trust, the trustee is in charge of managing it. So they can say, well, grandma doesn't want, the kids to get it until they're 25 and gotten a master's degree. Okay, check. I'll send them their distribution. So that's a part of a trust. There's possible tax benefits. I say possible. I'm not a tax attorney, so I always refer people to, someone like Roderick to say, okay, these are the tax consequences. Is there a benefit for having my stuff in a trust? Is there not? There are some benefits. Sometimes there's tax implications. Like if you have lots of property and you're getting rental property, if it's in a trust, it might have a different tax bracket than if it was individual. So those are some things that a tax advisor can tell you about. Possible protection from creditors. I have a client, she has things in her irrevocable trust because she has a ton of businesses and she gets sued all the time. So none of her assets are in her personal name. And when she gets sued, even if somebody's successful against her, they can only go after what she personally has, which usually is like a bank account and other things. They can't get any of her property because all her property is in a trust. And then the trust survives incapacity and death. So if you set up, the Tamika Isaac Divine Revocable Trust, and then I pass away, that house is still in the Tamika Isaac Divine Revocable Trust. It's just the trustee would be whoever is the trustee after I pass. But some drawbacks. Setting up a trust is not cheap. Getting a will, powers of attorney, all those things are usually cheaper than setting up a trust. A trust is very involved, so it does cost a pretty penny. It can be pretty complex. If you do an irrevocable trust, which my 20 years of doing this, I've only done 2 for people. That business owner I talked about, and this other guy who just was determined to do irrevocable, and then he comes back and says, I want to do this, and I'm like, you can't, because it's irrevocable. You cannot change you can't change things in an irrevocable trust, but if you have a revocable, you can. Again, the tax implications, the administration sometimes is a headache. A trustee, there are some people who go to trust companies because they will administer the trust. So if you want a grandchild to get this check, they get $10,000 when they get 25 and they've gone to college, then you can have a trust company who will do that. They can also invest the trust assets to make sure they're growing. And so that's kind of a little bit more than most people want to handle. So, but sometimes that's a drawback, but that's sometimes what you need to do. And then there's no oversight unless you go to court. If you have a will and it goes through probate court, the probate judge is going to make sure your wishes are taken care of. In a trust, unless someone sues your trustee because they're not doing what they need to do, nobody knows what the trustee is doing, and there's nobody to be over them unless you have like a trust company that's an oversight. So that's a benefit. Quickly, next one. A couple other ways to avoid probate, and this is all part of what we do when we plan together. And I mentioned to you at the very beginning, these are certain things. You want to know how do you have bank accounts, if you have beneficiaries, all that stuff. So I'm going to talk to you. If your goal is to avoid probate, then we can avoid probate, and it doesn't always have to be about a trust. If you have joint bank accounts, that joint account holder will get that money, and that doesn't go through probate. If you don't want to put somebody on your bank account while you're living, you can make that bank account payable on death, and that means upon your death, that person will get that money. That doesn't go through probate court. Again, the trust, we talked about that. The real property, joint tenants, a right to survivorship, or life estate deed. Those are ways that you can title your property now through another deed, and it doesn't go through probate. Your automobiles, if you have somebody on title with or, then that means that car will not go through probate, and it will automatically pass. Starting in July of next year, 2025, the legislature just passed a bill that will allow you to do a transfer on death provision on your vehicles. So I have some people who have done everything that nothing goes through probate except for their car. And nowadays, some of our cars are worth a pretty penny. So they still have to go actually do a whole estate just to transfer the car upon death. But now you can do a transfer on death, but that doesn't start till July. And then again, your insurance policies, make sure you have a beneficiary and a backup. And then the last thing I would say, that's the avoid probate. Last thing I would say, I mentioned when I was answering her question, all of these things, part of your plan, it is great to have a plan, but if your important people don't know where that plan is, then they don't know what to do. So make sure whether you come to a professional to help you or not, make sure that you get something. You can get a regular little binder. Make sure you put everything in there, and you make sure your people know where it is, because that is going to be critical. If folks have to look for a will and they can't find your will, it's like you didn't have it. In South Carolina, you have to probate somebody's estate within 10 years of their passing. If you do not probate someone's estate within 10 years, it is like they did not have a will. So even if you find the will 12 years, mom and dad you cleaned out the house and you found mama's will, and she died 10 years and 1 month ago, guess what? You have to act like she did not have a will, which means you have to go through that whole probate process, a more complicated process, and do a petition to determine heirs, which will cost a lot more money. And we're talking about building generational wealth. You want to pay less money when you pass, not more. If you don't plan properly, you are going to pay a lot more on the tail end, and you're not going to have a lot for folks to inherit. So with that, I am done, and exactly 7:30. I was trying. I went over this morning.
Tamika, I wanted to mention one thing about the joint tenants. In the scenario where grandpa leaves his land property, it might be about 20 acres in a very nice spot. So there's 5 children. And now grandpa's gone, but the property now is valued at $1 million because it's in a really nice spot, $1 million. And the 5 children were joint tenants. Well, 2 of the siblings passed away, and they had children. Those children are totally locked out because there are only 3 survivors now, right?
No.
The children of the grandfather were joint tenants.
Oh, with right to survivorship.
Right, joint
Okay,
tenants.
yes.
Now, 2 of those have died.
Right, okay,
Their
yes,
children no longer have any
correct.
access.
No,
that.
because when they died, their interest went to the other people who were, other siblings who were living. So yes, you are correct. Their children don't get anything because the siblings were on joint tenants with right to survivorship. So basically, that $1 million property, whatever child last is living, gets all. And that person can then decide through their will who will get it. So yes.
You just have to hope they have a good heart and spread the love, right?
You hope. All right, I will stick around if y'all have some extra questions, but if you all do have any questions, I'm happy to answer them, but it's really, really important that you think about like what your assets are and who you want to get it and start planning now. I know sometimes it's difficult conversations, but you'd rather have that difficult conversation now than leave it to somebody later to kind of try and figure out what your wishes were. Thank you, Pastor Jackson.
Were it not for Attorney Tamika, our family perhaps would have been really messed up badly. Put her information back up there. A number of persons were listening as I was in my office. She made mention of my niece and my sister, and I became the power of attorney. And after I became the power of attorney, my niece decided to draw up her own power of attorney papers, and got us in quite a bit of trouble because she, I got to be careful how I say this, she was using her power of attorney papers over the power of attorney papers that I had. You had to be careful about all of that. And so therefore I had to become a conservator and guardian, which is an extra step that we had to take. It's good to have an attorney to do estate planning. My grandniece and grandnephew, the grandchildren of my sister, are secure because she placed my sister's rental properties in a trust for the 2 of them. It has meant so much to us, but it has meant more to the 2 of them to know that grandmother, though she has dementia, grandmother looked out for them before she had dementia. And there's a kind of, just a swelling of, there's been a swelling of appreciation for grandmama, to know that grandmama took the time before she got sick to put all of her rental properties into a trust for the 2 of them. They speak of that all the time, and we want to thank you. At some point, I'm going to have to introduce them to you so they'll know who did it for them in the manner which you did. Thank you so very much. You may want to see her after the session is over. Again, we won't have it next week, but the week following, we'll have tax planning by Roderick Shiver, CPA. Nadia, I want to introduce you to Dina. We talked about entrepreneurship and also encouraging persons to start your own business, the advantages of having your own business. And Dina watches every Wednesday, and she's here tonight, and I want to make sure the 2 of you meet each other because you may want to start your own business. I think you'll do well. Let's stand on our feet. And if anybody else wants to start your own business and become a travel agent, you certainly may want to see her. In fact, at the meeting of the Young Pastors and Leaders Conference today, I made known that the travel arrangement, that's right, I've got to introduce you to her too, Dr. King. I made known that all travel arrangements for our preachers who will be, and speakers who will be with us for the Young Pastors and Leaders Conference, arrangements will be made by her. And we appreciate the service that she now provides to Brooklyn Church. Let us pray. God, Thank you, thank you, thank you for the information your people are receiving. Thank you for Senator Mika Isaac Devine, who prior to becoming a senator has been just an excellent attorney who has compassion, who really cares, who really is concerned, who gives so much of herself to make sure that families are secure in their possessions and are thinking about their children and their children's children. We thank you so much, and we look forward to God to what you have ahead of us as we set our sights on becoming members of a Believers Millionaire Club. And we know that persons like Nadia in particular, and persons who've yet to reach senior citizen age can really position themselves well. And we give them the opportunity to do so. Let the Spirit that is with us keep us. May we all enjoy great Thanksgiving with our families and our friends. In Jesus' name, amen. Thank you.